So it's a fresh new book that I would say that I don't have anything in, but I did kind of go ahead and get started with a few notes on this topic of, I guess, cells, atoms, the energy of structure and how it flows and moves, like the dynamics of it. And I'm gonna have a call with Struppi, and we're gonna just kind of brainstorm sacred geometry and the mother of all spheres.
There's a butterfly right outside the window. Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. The butterfly effect.
Yeah. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, we're spreading the word. Yeah, so there is all these kinds of names for something, you know, there is this something and we find names for it.
Yeah.
But some of the names are pointing at the essence of the thing, and some are, you know, not aware of it at all.
Right,
and,
like sunrise and sunset. They don't actually rise and set. The sun does. Yeah, so like that kind of concept is what you're saying.
And I think that words and language can be a very, very incredible tool to understand and use the principles that are at the heart of the cosmos, but at the same time they can very, very definitely disconnect us from it. Yes. Yeah.
You said in one of the comments that that the equilibrium is, the vector equilibrium is not in nature specifically because there's always motion, right? Is that what you're saying? So like, even though we can call it the vector equilibrium and we look at it on a piece of paper, that doesn't mean that it exists out there because it's always in motion. It's just a representation.
Well, I mean, I can make it exist in nature, you know. I can even, at some point I posted a picture where I put together a dozen chestnuts around one chestnut, and that is a vector equilibrium, right? But in the case of the chestnuts, they are not identical, so they are all a little bit bigger or smaller, or you know, rough or squished or something. So the shape that emerges by applying the pattern that is the mother of all spheres to it might not look the way that we would draw it. If we, so there is certainly that kind of possibility for the structure in universe, but there is never that perfect still equilibrium, right? So we tend to not notice that the drawing on the paper is still a present, an ongoing process. You know, you trace a line, but it's still, the line is still there, so it's still existing, it's still connecting its both terminals. And in synergetics, we are very aware of these things. We are aware and acknowledging that everything is embodied. Everything is already a full thing, and it does not make any sense to say, okay, let's start with nothing. Let's start with a point that has no dimension, right? That's not what a point is.
Okay. So are you talking about space-time, like that it's all past, present, and future? It's already there? Is that what you're saying?
That as well. I mean, I've again, please tell me if you've seen all of this and I talked.
No, I'm just already, like, imagine like I'm in kindergarten. Like, I don't even know, even though I mess with the sacred geometry, I don't really grasp and understand it, obviously. You'll find out as I keep asking questions.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's what it's about. And actually, when Bucky wrote Synergetics, the first thing he wrote into the book is "Dare to be naive," and I think that's the most crucial. You know, dare to be a child and look at the world with the eyes and the mind of a child, and the child would always take things into their hands. You know, they wouldn't they are made believe that there is the Santa Claus, you know, in the same way we are made believe that there is this kind of thing called space, which is different than time. All of that is really, again, just a game of make-believe. And when I talk about space-time, what I mean is all these structures that I play with, because they are all their own embodiments of space-time. But space-time is not uniform. Right? It's not.
Okay.
It's not that. You know. Let me show you this thing. I hope you've seen this model.
Okay. Yeah.
I've done a video not so long ago where I took this and did whatever it can do. But just looking at this right now, we can see this is what we think, what we could call the cube, right?
Right.
At least the straw parts of it. And this one is strong and stable, right? So it seems to be really a cube. But there is a difference between this cube and the thing that we think of as a cube, that we are made to think of, which is it the fourth step in the Euclidean geometry, right? So you start by saying a point has no dimensions, then you go on to say a line is one-dimensional and it goes on to infinity.
Yeah.
And then you go ahead and say a plane is two-dimension, no thickness, but it's again to infinity and square for some reason. And then you go into three-dimension and suddenly everybody talks about reality, right? So this is the reality we live in, three-dimensional reality.
Yes. Yeah.
And no one knows how to fit in the time into that picture, because up to that point, time was not part of it, nor was any recognition of the paper that you have been drawing on all the time, and the very bodiness of the point that you dropped, because that is a sphere of ink or something that drops into the paper and is held by the paper. And you know, the line really connects two points. Both are like the centers of gravity of a sphere, and in our understanding the line is more of a division between two sides of it. Right? So there is a very strange kind of shift of focus embedded in the way that we are taught geometry, and that by that we are taught to make sense of the world. And that three-dimensional cube that everyone thinks of when they say space actually would only be these 12 straw struts here, these ones, the ones that do the squares.
Okay, and that would be collapsible.
Yeah, usually we would think of it as a solid again. So if there is some sort of whatever it is that surface, it's not really thought through, and there's a lot of things wrong about this picture, and I did dissect that in detail in the video called Unboxing Reality. You know, there's a lot more. Yeah, like the problem with verticals and horizontals and what they really are. But the crucial point about this thing is that if we take out what is kind of alien to us right now, which is these diagonals, right? So the cube that we think of doesn't have them.
Okay.
In that cube, this is our unit, and this would be rendered irrational because it's the hypotenuse of the square.
Okay.
It's the square root, the root, you know, the thing that gives rise and strength to the structure.
I like.
But if you take it out, then you might see that while the square root itself is still part of a structure, that cube suddenly collapses and becomes a transform. And this is because, of course, there is no place in universe that is only space without time, and universe doesn't hold its breath to keep this in place. You know? So there is no more triangulation in this structure, except for the fact that, I don't know if you can see, but in the corners of this there is a triangle of the string passing by.
Yeah.
So there is still some triangulation also in the nature of the straws. The shape that we are thinking of when we call this a cube is not triangulated, and thus it's not existent.
So
yes.
What I'm seeing is space is like a square and time is like a triangle.
Well,
like the pyramid inside of the triangle, or is that your left angle? Is that what you call left angle?
What I call the left angle is, again, a wordplay, because we call a square rectilinear, or rectangular, right? Because the 90-degree is supposed to be right angle.
Okay.
And
see, now I get it.
Yeah, all of these things that I play with are equilateral triangles, and I think that's a very clumsy name. So I thought, well, if we have a right hand and a left hand, and space-time always has two sides to it, then why not call the 60-degree angle the left angle, right? So essentially that would render any triangle with some 60-degree angle in it a left angle, but more specifically the one that has all the same angle.
So is that 60, those ones?
Yes. And the more interesting part about it is really that this is the triangle that you get when what you don't see in this model if you don't know it is that this is really still 4 big spheres coming together, right? So
yeah, I kind of drew it on my book.
I've got somewhere here. This is a model of those 4 spheres.
I want to know what is the space in between those 4 spheres?
That is an octa, what I call the 8 eyes. And,
that's the eyes. Okay, that's what I was trying to figure out. I thought that's what you called the eyes, the space between the spheres.
That's, well, yes. If now I don't have all the, I have all the models, but but if you take, and this is really something you should, if you've never done it, just do by yourself. You take 3, or let's take 4 objects that are spherical. Could be apples, and you put them together, and you start with 1, and you already recognize that 1 is twofold because it has inside and outside. Right?
Yes. Like concave and convex, kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and both sides make the whole. Right. So there is no separation between inside and outside, but a connection by this very shape that you're holding in your hand.
Yes.
And if you have 2 of them and you bring them together, then you realize they make a connection. They meet in a point, what we call the kissing point, where the 2 spheres meet. And there is a connection, like if I were to take magnets, which I also have somewhere around here. I'm very well prepared, obviously. But if you have those 2 magnets, there is a magnetic force between the centers of those 2 spheres. And those are the centers of gravity. So the whole acts together to have that center. The center is a resultant of the whole.
Okay.
And that connection between these 2 centers is what the line, if you draw one,
that's the vector.
Yes, it's the vector. It's a force connecting those 2.
All right. I think that's like the hyperboloid, that magnetic tube in a torus. That's outside of your geometry.
I'm not so in depth in the torus thing, but in a way I am, because what I'm playing with is all tori.
Yeah.
All of these things, like even this one that I'm holding here, if you were to look closely at that corner here, it'd be difficult to tell. But there is these 3 sticks, and they pass by one another, right? They can't go through the same point.
Yeah.
Every point always only has place or space for one thing at a time. And if you have something like this, where things come together, they come together very closely, and then they move around one another, and that is in a vortex.
Yes.
It's spinning.
Vortex. There you go. That's a good word for it.
Either one way or the other. But every vertex is a vortex, right?
Every
vertex.
That's
which
where
is the corner, right? So if I look at the structure, it has 4 vertices. But really, those 4 vertices are actually vortices too.
Wow. Okay. All right. I'm soaking it up. Go on.
Yeah. And now, if we recognize that these 2 spheres that we brought together, and maybe I should just get them. Do I take? No. I'm gonna stay with this for the moment.
Okay.
All right. So we have our 1 sphere.
Mm-hmm.
We were there, right? And
Yeah.
we know it has both inside and outside, so it's actually 2 in 1, right? Yeah. So, and we can't look through this one because it's such a high frequency that the little parts that make it, the molecules of metal that form this shape, are so tiny that the spaces between them are so small we can't look through them. So we can't, that's really the definition of a point, is something that is so small that we can't make it, we can't take it apart with our senses anymore. We can't tell the different parts of it apart. But if you take a point on the paper and take a microscope, if you take a point in the sky and take a telescope, you see it's a big thing. Size is relative, but there is some substantial body
uniformity. Like there's a consistency to whether it's a small scale or a big scale. These points make something either more expansive, more space between it, or more dense, you're saying.
Yes.
Like that crystal or that metal ball, I should say.
Yeah. And another way to make sense of this is that this one seems to be a perfect sphere, right? But looking very closely at it, we would notice that it has a very high number of corners. Now, if you take a very big rock, like a mountain, and you break off a part, and that rock tumbles down and hits its corners. In the beginning, it's very, very rough, right? It has some very few corners and edges, and it's very sharp usually and all that. Now it goes downhill and follows the flow of the water, and by continuously knocking off its corners, it gets more corners, and that gets smoother and smoother and smoother.
I like that.
Right? So those are just things that we can take into consideration when we look at something and call it a sphere, because the Greek concept of a sphere, that's one of the many things about Greek geometry that Bucky was very pointing to and saying this doesn't work, because if the Greek sphere would be one that is hermetically sealed. It says there is an infinite number of points at the same radius from a common center. But if that were true, then you would have a surface without any openings, right? And that can't be true in a cosmos where you have thermodynamics, where there's always exchange between the inside and outside of a system. Right? Okay. So there need to be some holes in it to have that exchange, but
like the movement to it, so that the points of where everything touches, there's actually, it's not so crammed packed that you can't move, you're saying?
Well, it's not, if I take something like this, now this thing has a very low frequency. I'm gonna explain what frequency is in a moment, okay. But you can tell that this eye here, this triangle that is open, is very large, right? So it wouldn't hold, for instance, this thing. It just drops through, right?
Okay.
Now, if I were to make this exact shape in a higher frequency, the next one would look like this. which is overall still the same shape. But now you look at that face, that triangle, that eye, and you see every one of those is divided into 4.
4. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is 2 by 2. 2 times 2. But that means that now this big eye is suddenly much more able to hold things back. Okay. So even though the big eye wouldn't hold that thing, I can't get this in there because there is the smaller eyes instead of the big eye. And that is what gives you a surface. If you think about this, for instance, a balloon, right? Is a skin stretched around something, and if you put in air and it's airtight, that means that the openings between the molecules of rubber are so small that the air wouldn't fit through. But there's still openings.
Oh.
The same is true with water. It might be watertight, but not tied to mercury, because mercury is smaller and just goes through.
Oh, okay. That's back to like the sunrise sunset idea. We just don't have these concepts because we've never applied them.
We never thought them through.
Yeah.
Because we have been fed that idea of there is a surface in the first place, and we never knew where it comes from or what it's made of, because it's never part of the thought and the framework.
I get it.
So those are just, things to consider. And now, if we jump back to our spheres that we were having here, and we say, okay, Bucky was always saying that if you have only a single sphere in the universe, it would not know that it's there.
No observer.
It lacks every point of reference, every otherness that makes sense of the self, And for Bucky, he was saying that life really only begins when you have at least 2. They come together, right? So now you have one and another, and other. And the first other that we would experience as beings that we call humans was probably, the other, the mother, maybe the other, the father, the brother, and the sis. Well, that doesn't really work that well, but sister as well. There's the otherness in that already, and the recognition of one and other. But if you think back, a very small child is taking everything into their mouth, right? They take everything in to distinguish between inside and outside. Because if you take in your foot, you feel it from the inside, and this other, which is the outer,
which is me,
is actually something that I feel from inside, so that's me. So you can identify yourself by saying, okay, you are all the parts that you feel from the inside. But if you've ever woken up in the night with your arm like this and it fell asleep, and you're like, where is my arm? I don't feel it. And then there's this dead feeling part of flesh lying around. You know how quickly you lose that inner sense of that, and then it becomes the other again.
Yeah. Wow.
So all of that kind of binds together.
Just like with these stories.
Yes. Now, if we have these two spheres meeting, and they will eventually, if they were really alone in the universe, they would draw one another in because of gravity. And the moment they meet and connect, we have that connection that we were speaking of with the vector.
Yes.
Right? And that goes from one center to the other, and exactly through the point where they meet. So that one vector that is actually unity of two spheres, right? So you bring together two and you get one, which is the connection between the two, and half of it is the one sphere's radius and the other half is the other sphere's radius.
Okay.
And they are both part of that one vector.
Yes.
Cool. And now we actually have movement between the two. Well, if they, however they are related to another, it's only a linear relationship. You know, they cannot in relationship to one another, they can only move away or closer, but right or left and that kind of thing doesn't make any sense. They can move out or into one another.
Okay.
And around. Whoops. And now, if the third one comes in and meets these, then at the beginning they can move around like this, possibly, you know, all around. Still kind of only being 2 units. And then they meet all like this. And suddenly they make, whoops, they make the triangle.
Yeah.
And we spoke about that triangle being the left angle already. And you can actually see me through there, right? I can look in.
Yeah.
So there is no surface. That triangle is a relationship between 3 spheres, but there is an in between the spheres now. There is that eye where you can actually look through, and that's again a bit of a wordplay on my side, because I realized the English word window, which means window, comes from the Gothic language where it meant wind oak.
Was that?
Wind oak. And oak is kind of the same root as Auge in German, eye.
Okay.
So it was the eye of the wind eye, which means it's a hole in the wall where you can look through, but the wind comes through, right?
Okay.
So the windows on a ship we still call Bullaugen in German, bull's eye, I suppose.
Huh.
And that I took that idea and took it back to say, okay, we could call this a window, but to go further back in what a window really is, it's an eye. It's that opening where you can look through, you know?
Yeah.
And so now we have that, and they are making a plane. They are creating a plane because there are 3 points. And that plane is a triangle, but it's not a surface. But if you ever had a tripod or a stool with 3 legs, you notice that whatever the ground is doing, you can put the 3 legs down and it's staying, you know, it's sitting there. It might fall over if it tips over the you know, if
one point's too high.
Yes, if at some point a leg is too short or something, it may trip over, but it cannot rock.
Mm-hmm.
Now if you take anything that has 4 legs, any chair or stool or shelf or whatever, unless you have a perfectly plain ground to put it on, it's always gonna, and even then it's probably gonna rock. Because 4 do not make a plane, only 3 do.
3 make a plane. Okay, so I have a question then.
Yes.
So 3 points make a plane. Does it not really that space, that eye doesn't become a shape until a 4th sphere is added on it to where it would close it in? So is it only a plane because there's 3 spheres? If you added a 4th sphere, then that eye becomes a different shape. It's not a plane anymore, right?
Yeah, we can talk about that in a second. And it's a good thought.
Okay.
And we keep that in mind.
Right.
But before we go there, there's one little thing I want to draw attention to, which is that these 3 can still move. They can move as a unit, but they can also, which is hard to do with this exactly here. It's easier to do with this, to show with this. This is actually just a lot of 4 eyes in a circle. But what they do is what you know from the torus. They can involute and evolute, right? And those 3 spheres here, they can do that. They can only do it together, right? So if you move one in, all the others will go out. But they still have that that freedom of movement in that way.
Okay, right? I get it.
And that only stops when you bring in a fourth.
Okay.
But if we add that fourth like this, like we did before, okay, now it's just that one connection, right? If it's here, then we do have two eyes, yeah?
Two
Pair
planes.
of eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have to be in the same plane. They are their own planes, basically, because they can move like this. But they are a pair of eyes.
Yeah.
So there's 5 vectors now, if we were to count them. And now if we move this one to a place where it touches all 3 others, and don't drop it. They are so smooth. If we move that to the place where it touches all the other 3, then we suddenly have something that has, again, like the very first with which we started. The very first sphere was defined by having both inside and outside, right? Within and without. So now we get to the point where we connect enough of them to have again a system that has that. Because that's the special thing about the tetra. It's the first and minimum structure that has both inside and outside.
So inside, so 4 spheres. So basically when you get 4 spheres together, now you don't only just have an inside and outside of each sphere, you have an inside of the spheres and an outside of the spheres.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. If I have this, maybe I'll rather take one that is a little more substantial. Where is it? It's the smallest thing, so it's at the very bottom probably. Here. Okay, so here, if you see that the corners, the vertices or vortices, those are our 4 spheres. Then you see that between them is the inside and around them is the outside, yeah? And that is a very special thing, because now we actually have a shape in contrast to the transform of the non-triangulated cube. We actually have a shape. It's both space-time, it's both together. There is no separation. We've never, in the whole process we've done so far, we've never said there is no time in this. Actually, we take time to explain it, to share it, right? To move through.
Yes.
And to look at it from many sides. And I would invite you to check the video where I actually locate time within space-time as the relationship between the bodies. But to make it very short and just include it in this discussion here, I learned this from David Abram, who's a brilliant author who wrote Spell of the Sensuous and Becoming Animal. And in Spell of the Sensuous, he explains at some time, he looks at the way that the written tradition, that the alphabetic tradition has changed our perception of the world, because it closed the feedback loop of language. Because before the alphabet, every written language was referencing the non-human or more than human world. Even the alpha in the Greek, this thing, or A, used to be the aleph in the Old Hebrew, which was the ox, was the head of the ox. So whenever you saw that or spoke it or read it, you would have that link to the non-human, at the very essence of it. And then the Greek took it over and changed it and put in the vocals. I shouldn't go too far into that, but it's really a good read. It's
I might check it out.
Eye-opening.
Yeah, because I'm really into words, changing the words that I use. I've been doing that for a while. I like that.
You will absolutely treasure that book. And what he's doing is that he goes around the world and looks at oral traditions of indigenous people and how they talk about place, not space and time, a separate thing, but place as both together.
Place, as in like
place.
Space and time?
Yeah. It's place is embodied space-time in a synergetic sense. And what he's doing there is that he realizes, well, if those two things are not separate to begin with, then where is that time? Where is that element of space? And he goes about it to think, well, what are the three realms of time that we speak of? It's past, present, and future. Mm-hmm. And what do they have as qualities? And he says, okay, the past is closed off, right?
Yeah.
You can't go into it, but it's there, and it's something that you can look back at. And the future is an open space where you can't get. And he looks around himself in that moment and realizes, well, the past is inside the bodies. Right? So in my body I have DNA, I have scars, and I have my whole memory that I can share with you if I verbalize it. So if I make it sound, I can share what is inside me with what is inside you. And if I have any other body, I can listen to the sound, and it tells me something about the inside of the body. It tells me about the structure of the body. And if I cut open a tree, I see the rings, so I can tell the past of climate in this place by looking at that. If I dig into the ground, I will find the history of the past of that place again. So it's always within the bodies that is the pasts.
Mm.
You know?
Pasts. I like that.
Yeah.
Pasts.
And the next thing would be the future, and already we notice, okay, it's open, right? It's not closed off like the past. But notice if we dug into the ground or chop the tree or, look into what is inside me, usually we can't go back into that present when that was present. But we can only look, we can remember by looking at it, but never get back. Well, and the future is an open space, so he realized that is behind the horizon. Right? If you look around you, even right now, there is a lot of horizons. There is might be a far horizon if you are out on the field, and that might be a far future. You don't know what lies beyond it, but you can potentially get there. And you can also, infer, I think, what lies behind the horizon by looking what lies directly before. Right? So if you see a river going off into the horizon, it might just continue. But you don't know where, unless you get there, and then it's not future. At the same time, there's a very close future to you, which is hidden behind everybody around you, right? So even yourself is hiding something from you, because you can't ever look at both sides of your hand at the same time. You can't look behind your body. You can turn. Things have to turn and spin to spin time, right?
Mm-hmm. These are words I'm playing with, so yes, I like this.
Yes. And that leaves us with the present, which is the realm between those two. It's the thing that is opened by the withinness of the bodies and the behind. So the between the bodies is the presence. And actually, in talking about this a while, I think Melissa, Spirit Stem, she spoke of the sphere of the presence, something like that, and we realized it's the sphere of reach, right? So think of the reach of your body. If you extend it everywhere, it's going to be a sphere.
Mm-hmm.
but you have the very many different layers to this sphere, because your eyes, for instance, have a very different kind of presence than your ears or your nose, or those many different senses that we that are our body, and each sense in a way has their own realm, their own sphere of reach, of presence. But what is within that is your presence, right? So that is just to take these things that we are somehow taught to think of as a line that goes from the past to the future,
Right.
and re-embody them within our actual interrelationships, and recognize that
I'm a sphere.
yes,
And in my sphere, I have the past in my DNA. I have the future beyond the horizon of the other spheres. And then I have my presence of being my senses and that awareness of all of the spheres, being able to reach and touch all of them. That's what you're saying?
And that sphere of presence is very closely related to your breath, right? So there is a common flesh to everybody on Earth, which is the air, which is an ocean that we're walking on the ground of, but it's really that common breath of everybody. And that exchange that goes on between your inside and your outside all the time, and the other insides and outsides, that's a common inside. That body of air is our common inside. It's our common body is the air, the earth. That practice of changing within and without. Really read Adams. It's really good what he's writing, because he's also talking about what the Lakota people. David Abram. He's talking about the Lakota, for instance, and their understanding of the Great Spirit and the winds that are the Spirit, and how they understand every spiral that they see as an embodiment of that wind. Right, because if you see spirals outside, that's usually the wind going this way or that way, taking the leaves with it, or the dust or something. But also, if you look at your body, they say that these spirals on your fingertips and your toes and your head are the places where the winds enter your body before you are born. Right?
Wow, I like that.
And some of them ground you, and some of them connect you to the air ocean. And there's 2 more spirals in your ears, right, where that sense organ that is so intimately connected to the past, because sound is already always past and tells you about the inside of things, those sense organs are spirals going into your ears, your head, and they say that these 2 are the children of the Great Spirit, and what you hear as your thoughts is the 2 of them talking to one another, right? And thinking about that a little more makes us understand that there is a very strange similarity between the air and what we consider our self, because if you try to see yourself, try to look at your own eyes without a mirror, right? Try to touch your own finger with the same finger, or bite your own teeth. You notice that there is a threshold, there is something where you can't get, And in a sense, your own self is transparent to you. You can't really see it. You can't look through it necessarily, but you can't see it. And the same is true for the air. Right? It's there around us all the time, but we usually don't see it unless there's something that is carried by the air.
Right.
And that makes us wonder make me wonder if the thing that is alive in us is really not just that air within the body that we are. Right? In the moment when it moves into us, around in us, and then back out, that is what animates us. That is why we are, and why we can talk and sing and be and move and all these things, because that common body of Earth is living through us.
Yeah, living us. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I get it.
Yeah. So that's just to kind of get a grip on what time as an aspect of space-time might be. And I would add a fourth one, actually a fourth realm of time, which I think would make sense to call, as the Aboriginal people of Australia do, dream time, which would be the capacity of ours to realize the continuous creation and change of the space-time around us, right? So if you have a dream of how a place can be, it's not yet there. It's not manifest in the present yet.
Okay.
But it's living inside your body, so it's part of your past, because you have some sort of ideas based on what you experienced in coordination with the future and present around you. So it's something that is moving all over these other realms and connecting.
Is this like the imaginal realm? Like the imagination?
Yeah,
Is that the
maybe.
same?
Yes. I mean, like for me, when I got into permaculture and learned about these principles, it changed the way I see the world, because now I see a field and I see the forest that was there and can be there again. Right? I can look at the city and not see just the city as it is, but also the forest that it was and might become.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the potential in that, the potential for change and for growth and healing of all these wastelands that this thinking inside of boxes has created.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vision.
Yes.
You have a vision.
Mm-hmm. A vision that is, going beyond what is open, what is visible to the eyes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that kind of talking about where these things are. But that means now we have an understanding of what constitutes something that can be considered a shape and a body. And that insideness and outsideness is a very fundamental part of that. And realizing that the boundary, and I like to call it boundary because that contains the binding aspect of it. Right? Mm-hmm. It binds both inside and outside.
Okay.
Right? So we are taught to believe that we are separate from the universe, that we are somehow, caught in that bag of skin, and we really only are that thinking part of us, and that body is more of a prison to us than anything else. But really, nothing of this is true, because the skin that we are thinking of as a border, it's a hermetic seal to the world around us, is exactly what connects our inside to our outside.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And both sides are us.
So like we're a vector now.
Yeah. We are actually talking under four eyes.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
4 eyes.
Yeah. 4 eyes. This thing.
So when you say 4 eyes, that also just has the one thing inside of it between the spheres. You also call an eye.
Well, yeah. If we have 3, if we have a triangle, that is an eye. 1 eye. If we have 2 triangles, that is a pair of eyes. Now, if we have one of these, the first thing with inside and outside, and we count the eyes, it's 4 of them. Now, the Greek, they thought of this as having surfaces, so they called it a tetrahedron, 4 surfaces, 4 faces.
So I'm going to challenge you. So if that's 4 eyes, because it's 4 spheres or 4 vortices,
that's not why.
Also the space in between the spheres, that empty space between them, that would be like the 5th eye.
I see where you're looking at, but I'm not calling it 4 eyes because it's 4 spheres.
Okay, so it's because it's sides?
Because if you have 4 spheres and all of them touch, then you have 6 vectors, 6 connections, half a dozen. That's what you have here. If you look at it, it's in my hand, you can count.
Okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 spheres.
4 spheres. And how many?
3. Oh, okay. The 6 lines, the 6.
Yes, 6 vectors.
Vectors.
That's the connections, which is half a dozen, but that's something else. And if you count the eyes of it, right, where you can look through, then you have 4 of them.
I see. I think.
Yeah. Like
4.
One is facing me right now. That's the triangle you can actually see as a triangle. One, if I turn it like this, it would look at you. Maybe that's better.
Yeah.
So there's one facing you, and you can see there's 3 others.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's why I call it 4 eyes.
And also where the 3 points go together, that's where you have your vortex also.
Exactly. That
would
is
also make
the
4.
center of a sphere.
Okay.
And it's a very curious incident or curious thing that the 4 eyes actually has 4 spheres too.
Okay.
It's a very special kind of thing, but the whole thing is a very special kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's unique in very, very many aspects. And that kind of relationship between 4 and 3 that is inherent in it has to do with the dozen and these things. And it's one more thing that you can see from this particular model is that 3 of them, of those vectors, are a light color and 3 are a darker color, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to take this, I don't know if that's too far away. These are 2 triangles, right? There's here one dark, and here is a lighter one.
Yeah.
Which I can still open because that's just on a string. Beads on a string. And now if I have these 2 triangles, right? It's 2 eyes separately, right? But if you count the edges of those 2 triangles, it's 6. Right? Now if you open them up, like here, and you put them together like this, the same 6 connections that were 2 separate triangles now come together to make 4 connected triangles.
4 because the bottom, the base too. Okay.
Yeah. So now that is synergetics. Synergetics is always getting more from putting things together than you could think, than you would expect. We are taught to think 1 + 1 = 2. But in this case, 1 + 1 = 4. Right?
Yeah. So this is what Bucky meant by do more with less.
Yeah. That's
really
essentially
it wasn't just a poetic statement. It was
no, not at all. It's a very, very factual statement because that's how synergetics works in essence. It's always that kind of bringing together separate parts to get something that is much more than those parts separately could ever be.
Okay.
And that becomes far more obvious in the next step of evolution when we were to do the following. I can take a model of that from my pocket because I got it there. This one. I don't know if the camera is really focusing in on that, probably not. But you can see this is a triangle, right? With 6 spheres.
Yeah.
If I turn it a little, you see, it's a 4 eyes whole thing. The same structure that we've had here. This is a 4 eye with 4 spheres, right? Now, if I put those 4 on another triangle of 6 spheres, it looks like this. So in total that's 10, which is interesting because if you ever heard of the Tetractys of Pythagoras, that's 10 spheres, and the Pythagoreans, I think, do not believe in three-dimensional space, because their explanation of the cosmos was embodied. They were teaching it with the use of 10 pebbles in that case, and they explained the whole, all the way to this point, the nature of space-time with that, and mathematics and music and all of that with the Tetractys. And funnily enough, it's now in our common understanding embedded in the three-dimensional thinking. So even though they were not talking of that, now we call it that. We say, aha, and now we put together 4 spheres and it's a three-dimensional shape called the tetrahedron. But that is really talking besides the point, kind of.
I think
but
you're saying that we're deciding, we're thinking about something, we're relating to it and understanding it from our current point in human consciousness, which might be limited from how it was created originally when they perceived it.
Yeah, I'm very certain about that. I'm pretty sure that Pythagoreans were working with a very different concept of space-time than Euclidean geometry would have us believe. But now if we have this one, and if I show you the vectors of it, it looks like this.
Okay.
Right. So this thing, if you count the vertices, the corners of this, it's 10 of them, because that's the 10 spheres that we have here.
Okay, I see.
But the number of struts would be 24 now, or half a dozen, but that's not so important. I'm just too much in love with decimal counting. But more importantly, if you look at that, you see how it actually could be understood as 4 of these smaller ones sitting on one another, right? There's 1 on the top and 3 on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right, so in exactly the same way as before we had the 4 spheres coming together, now we have 4 eyes coming together to make a bigger one. So there's a fractal thing going on. And actually it continues because, well, never mind. That's for the next
little baby steps.
Yes.
Baby
but
steps.
This is good to see a crucial thing, which is that at the heart of that 4-eye there's another shape, the dark brown one. Right? You see that?
Oh yeah, I see it inside, in the middle.
Exactly, and that one taken out would look like this. And this is what the Greek would call the octahedron. Again, the hedron. What I call the octops, or 8 eyes, because it's 8 eyes. Right?
Yeah.
And it has exactly the same number of connections or vectors as the cube that everyone thinks of as a cube, the ghost cube, the non-triangulated one. So this is 12 straws. Here is the same made from these bamboo sticks, and you see it's just as transformative. And those exact 12 straws put together in this shape suddenly hold that shape. Because it's all triangles, right? Now we get to another level of doing more with less. Because if we wanted to keep this as the cube that we think of it, then we would have necessarily to put in this, or some sort of micro-triangulation, like if you put a lot of glue into the corners of a cube of that kind of shape, then you have micro-triangulation in the corners. We don't think of it like that, but that's what we would have. Now, if we compare the volumes of these things, we will notice that, how do I go about this? Actually, there's two more things before we talk about that. The one thing is, what is frequency? And I've already dropped the word in here a few times, but I've not explained it so far. But it might be obvious from these. Now, if I have this thing, the tiny tetra that we looked at in the beginning, with the 4 spheres, there is this. If you look at an edge of it, there is 2 spheres here, right? And between them is one valley, one inter-valley between those 2 spheres.
Yes.
It's the interval between the 2 spheres, right?
Yeah.
And that interval, counting those intervals, gives you the frequency. So this would be, in the synergetic terminology, would be a 1 frequency 4 eyes. Because looking at it like this, you can see going from one corner to the other, there's only one connection, one interval, 1 frequency.
Okay.
Now, the same overall shape, but with more spheres, as this is. Now, if you count the spheres on one edge here, you see it's 1, 2, 3, right?
Yeah.
Which gives you 2 intervals.
2 valleys.
2 valleys. Yes. So that one looks like this, and really is 2 frequency. 1, 2. So that is what frequency in synergetics means. I could do a 7 frequency tetra, and the whole thing in total would still look like a tetra, but it would have far more spheres in it. And
so the frequency is like the addition of the intervals?
It's the counting of the intervals in a way, in going in a line around the edge of a system. Alright.
Okay.
And that leads us to the second thing, which is to rewild our learned experience of geometry a little more. Now, if we were to account for an area in geometry, we would do that with squares usually, right? We talk about square meters, right? So we think of that, but it turns out that actually comes from triangles, because if I increase the frequency of my triangle like this, and now I have a 2 frequency triangle, right? So it's 2 times 2. Then I get 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles, right? 2 times 2 is 4.
Okay, yes, I see the 4.
And that is true whatever frequency we're talking about. So what we talk of as square numbers really is triangle numbers. And we already checked that it's hard to have a surface that is a square
without the
while
angle,
it's very
angle.
While it's very easy to have a plane that is a triangle. And so accounting for area in triangles is a lot more sane. Sensible. Yeah.
All right.
And the next thing would be, in geometry we would call volume. We account for that with cubes, right? So if you have a cube that has 2 units of length per edge, right? So it's 2 times 2 times 2. That's 8 cubic meters, for instance. Right? But that also originates with the triangles, because if I have this and I count, let's take these two, 2 times 2 times 2, that would still be 8, because we have these 4 cornered 4 eyes. right?
The
So
math
this-
works out to be the same. It doesn't matter if you think in terms of squares or triangles.
Well, it seems not to matter, but it does matter, because one gives you something that you can actually use and work with, and the other is something that is an abstraction.
Empty. Yeah.
Yeah, empty, exactly.
Yeah.
I've got somewhere over in it's over there. But never mind. There's a
You need to levitate.
never mind. I'm gonna get it to make that very clear.
Oh wow.
Now this is already very hard to hold, but if I were to put in 6 diagonals in the faces, then it would hold the shape of the cube.
I see it.
But
There's
without
4
them,
squares
it's hard.
inside that square.
Right. So this is 4 cubes. No, 8 cubes. It's a cube of the second frequency, so to speak, which consists of 8 cubes.
Mm-hmm.
But those, even though they are uniform and they are thought of as static, they don't really exist in the real world any more than the first frequency does. And I mean, this thing can do things that are much more triangulated and therefore far more significant, like these kinds of things. And I've got some videos where I cover that, but that shows us that kind of idea of cubic volume is not really valid unless you have those triangles that support the structure. And even then, the whole thing would only be as strong as those diagonals. And all the rest of what we put into that thing, all those straws, do not partake at all in the structure. They are only there as a redundant weight to the thing. Whereas this has our 4 smaller tetras,
Mm-hmm.
and those are a unit of volume in synergetics. So this is the unit 4i, the unit tetra. And if I'm looking at any of these other things here that have the same relative size, right? So it's made from the same kind of size vectors, then this is a rational unit of volume for all of them, except for the icosa, because that's out of phase, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Whoop, went over that one.
Right. Yeah, and really we don't need to remember all this stuff I'm showing and telling you right now, because it's more of a, you get something, and even a small thing now, and that is a seed that can grow into all
Yes.
of the rest, because it's all again and again and again fractals and the same kind of things coming in and out and into the same kind of relationships. So understanding some of it is the way to understand.
I get
more
it.
and
You're
more of it.
sharing a frequency with me, and it's being recorded in my past. And when I need to recall it in the present or future, it's already in me now because I've consumed it from your sharing it with me. So while it might not make sense now, 2 days from now, I might have like something click in my head and see that visual
Yes.
that you've shown me.
Yes, and I mean, the most important thing I can invite you to is to actually start playing with these things yourself. And I've done some videos on my channel where I show how to do these kinds of structures with the straws and the strings, or let it be beads, doesn't matter. Because that's something that doesn't really cost much, and you don't need much tools or anything to it, and it's so easy that even kids can do it, and at the same time you get something that is really resilient, and if this breaks, which is not so easy to do, then it's easy to fix. And even then, if it breaks, I can say, okay, nice, it was alive, you know, it was there, I could play with it, I could learn from it, and now it's gone and transformed into something else. But I don't need to be, I don't need to be tender with this in a way. I don't need to be like, oh, this is that sacred thing that rests on the shelf, so I look at it all the time and never interact with it, because it's actually somebody who wants to play with you, right? And the best way to understand these things, and I'm speaking from experience there, is to make them yourself and get your hands on them. Because I read my introduction to synergetics was Amy Edmondson's A Fuller Explanation, and it's a absolutely brilliant book. And I was like reading it, and I was like, oh yeah, all of this makes so much sense. Yeah, but what is it for? Like I called it a tetrahedron back then, but what is that? I mean, it makes sense to me, but I have no reference to it from experience. I've never met one, you know, I've never recognized one.
Yeah.
So I felt like, okay, I need to figure out ways to get these things into my life so that I can learn about them, so that I actually know something, you know, and I can share that knowledge as well. And it's just, you know, playing with them for their own sake is a good thing, but also realizing the use and applications of all these things. Because whether you make them from wood or from metal or from big or small or from fabric and paper or cardboard or whatever, every single one will be different in their own way, depending on what kind of flesh you make them from. And they will always have their own individual kind of essence. But
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yes, but at the same time, they all share common principles and aspects that are something that is metaphysical. Actually, Bucky divided the cosmos not just into inside and outside, but also physical and metaphysical. And physical was the actual embodied one, you know, where this is a 4i. But the metaphysical one is the pattern behind that, the principle behind that. And in a metaphysical sense, I can talk about any tetra and say that it has a volume of 1, and it has these and these kinds of attributes and qualities. Like, for instance, the tetra is the smallest volume with the largest surface, if there were one, which is great for an oven, for instance, if you want to have much heat transmitted. Yeah. So actually the tetra in the Greek, in the esoteric tradition, is related to fire. Because if you put it on the ground, it looks like a fire, right?
Yeah.
But if you turn it this way around and you make a hole in the ground and put your fire in there, you will not recognize it, because this is a fire that is turned from its heels to, from its head to its heels, and suddenly it works synergetically and not energetically. So you don't waste all the stuff, but you actually collect and gain. And in the end, you have a pit full of glowing embers, which you can quench, and then have the half of the carbon of the plant material to feed back into the soil. And these things, they can go so many ways, but realizing the relationships between only just like the basic structures, the very basic that we're looking at right now, can give you so many tools and so many solutions for problems that you might encounter, because you're not left with one solution to all problems. There is no uniform anything, but space-time itself is what I call polyform. Right? So I speak of these things as many eyes, polyops, not polyhedra, and I call them also polycentric. So instead of having egocentric or heliocentric or geocentric or whatever centric, polycentric means everybody is their own center, and you can take in any perspective. You can center the sun, you can center the earth, you can center the end on the earth, and it always is its own, very own heart of the whole.
So you're calling that poly what?
Polycentric.
Polycentric.
And polyform instead of uniform, because one form, which is the triangle, gives rise to all forms, because all other forms, if they are form, if they have a shape, you can bet that they have triangles on some level or another, because only triangles are structure, only triangles have shape and can hold it, right? So that's why I call these things polycentric, polyform, polyops. And there's many more things in that direction, but to go back just a little step and then also go to where we wanted to go, to the mother of all, to the vector equilibrium. We're getting very close now.
Okay.
And one thing on the way there was to recognize that if this whole thing, has 4 of these tiny tetras in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a volume of 4 tetras, right? And the space in between, the complementary space that is between the 4, if you put them together,
Mm-hmm.
that's the octa, the 8 eyes. That's the other 4 of those 8 that you get by 2 times 2 times 2. So in another way, we can say, if this is a volume 1, this is a volume of 4.
Okay.
But if you count the corner, the edges, the stuff that I actually put in, this is 6, which is half a dozen, and this is 12, which is a dozen. So this is only 2 times the stuff that I need for this, but it is 4 times the volume. Yeah, let me rephrase that. If I make this, I take 6 sticks or straws, 6 vectors.
Yeah.
They give me a unit of volume, 1. So if those 6 are a quantum, then the volume of that is 1. And if I take 2 times the sticks,
Mm-hmm.
which is 12,
Yeah.
a dozen, and I put them together this way, I actually get a volume of 4.
Oh, I see it. Okay, the 2 triangles are together. I see it now. Yes.
Yeah, it's this.
Their
Is,
bases are together. I see.
If I were to show you the spheres that this is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a dozen connections, but it has 6 corners, 6 spheres, right? So it looks like this.
Yes.
And usually, mostly, if we look at that, we see 1 at the top and 1 on the bottom, and there's 4 in between.
Mm-hmm.
So we think of this always in kinds of squares and of pyramids and these things. But really, if you turn it a little, you might also see that it's 2 triangles sitting on one another, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing with the perspective. There's always that kind of perspective where you turn it like this and you see triangles all over, and then you turn it a little and it looks like this, and it suddenly looks like squares, all of it.
Yeah.
And that is why we are so into squares, because they are, you find them in the universe, but they are always a relationship of triangles. They are something that the triangles do.
They're just a point of view. The squares are just a point of view.
Yes, and they are actually not the substantial part, you know.
I see. Yeah.
I've done a video on precession where I go more into detail what right angles are in a synergetic universe, what they really mean. And they are always something that is the relationship of moving bodies, right? So if we do one little jump back to where we were with these 4 spheres in the beginning, right? We put them together one by one, right? But really, it's more likely that 2 units of 2 come together. So these 2 pairs. And if they come together, they wouldn't come together like this, forming a square, because that still can move
Unstable.
this way.
Yeah.
But they would precess, right? So they would go whoop,
There's my spin. Okay.
and there's your right angle, right?
All right.
So that's the thing. If I bring them together like this, they naturally form the 4 eyes, right?
Yeah.
They just can't help themselves. They come together like that. And that is why, looking at any of these, you see that from one angle it looks like right angles. Like this edge and the one here, they are at right angles to one another. But the space, the room between them is really because they are not going through the same plane. Because they are opening up.
It's like we've only been taught to see things as shadows of something else. Like in school and everything, we've only been taught to see the shadow, the flat plane of whatever the thing is that we're learning.
Yes. And it wouldn't even be so bad if it was only that. But the problem arises that if you define, as we do, the edges of the square or the cube as unit, right? So we say the distance from one corner of the cube to the other is 1. Then we have, per definition, rendered the root of the square, the hypotenuse, to be irrational, right? So if this part of the square is 1 and this is 1, then this is the square root of 2, 1.41 and forever. And that means having a square and the cube as units for area and for volume makes everything else besides these 2 special things irrational.
See.
You cannot even if you take your compass and you draw, your circle and you draw the flower of life, and you suddenly get all those triangles in there, because what you're doing is bringing together spheres. When you do that, and even the first triangle that you do, like the most simple thing you could do is to have a line. You draw a line, and then you take your compass and you go whoop, and you have 2 circles intersecting, giving you the so-called vesica Pisces.
Yes.
And in there you have a pair of eyes. If you connect all the vertices, 2 triangles, right? You cannot have those have an area that is rational. If you have square units for area, that's what incommensurability means. You cannot have both of them rational.
So it's like they're different languages.
Yes. And they don't work together. If we define one of them, and essentially that one that we define as unit, if we define that as rational, the rest of the universe becomes irrational. You cannot have a rational sphere. You cannot have a rational volume of any shape other than a cube or a cuboid. And that is consequential, because it renders, if we want to have a solution for anything, we do not go for those irrational things. We cannot even tell that they have some relationship between them, but we always choose the thing that is rendered rational. But, and that's a big but, my very first action was to take out this from that, right?
Yeah.
And which one is a rational volume, right? It's very obvious, very obvious. And if I have this here as my unit volume, then this cube, this very cube connected to it, with this as the square face, that has a volume of 3 times this. Exactly 3 times. Okay?
Just going around, because you're creating spaces around it from the square.
Well, this is a little bit bigger than that. It extrudes from it. But essential and important is that it is exactly 3 times the volume, and not irrational, but 3 times.
I see what you're saying.
Right? But if you go the other way around, right? If this is your unit cube and you want to get the volume of that, you can check out the formula and all that. It's complicated to no end, and you cannot have a rational volume of this. It's still going to be a third of this, but it will not be. I mean, in decimal accounting, there is no rational third either, right? Because 0.333333 and forever, there's no rational in that. But that is very important, because that means while in one direction everything is rendered irrational but our unit, the other way around, everything except for things that are out of phase is rational, including this.
Okay.
And not only that, it also shows us something, because to make this a thing, we need this. So the total number of parts is not 12, that would be the corners of the edges of the cube, but actually 12 plus 6, 18.
To hold the full structure together.
Yeah, exactly. And all that to get a volume of 3. Now, if instead I take those 12 and I put them together as the 8 eyes, we remember that had a volume of 4.
Yes.
Right? So I can have 12 plus 6, and that's 3. But crucially, of course, if I have this cube here, then the diagonal is longer than this edge, right? So there is kind of, there's a bit of a thing that one has to wrap their mind around, which is that while in traditional classical geometry you compare the so-called Platonic solids in a way where all the edges are always the same, and you would have a cube with edge 1 and a tetra with edge 1, that's a different thing than this, because in this case we're comparing edge 1 tetra with edge, I think it's square root of a half cube. And that means that if I wanted to have a volume for 8 eyes in relation in this size, then it would have longer edges than this particular cube, right? So it's not like a cube with the same edge length as the 8 eyes has the same volume or a smaller volume. Of course, if you have that, if the edges are the same length of cube and octa, then the cube would be bigger. But that's a flawed comparison, because the ratio is really connected to that to the square root, to the hypotenuse of the square, and not the edge.
Okay. Way beyond what I can comprehend, but I'm just so
I know it's really kind of confusing to think of it, but
I don't think I'm going to get that one right now.
It's just, you can remember that the volume of a tetra is 1, and of an octa is 4 times that, and which doesn't mean you can fit in 4 tetras of that size into that shape. That's not how it works, because the tetras are really going out to the corners, and the octa is much more round, much less circular. So a sphere is the maximum volume with the smallest surface area, right? So the more you get to that sphere, the more volume you have in relationship to the surface. And that means I cannot fit in 4 of these into that. That doesn't work, they wouldn't go. But I could fill this up with, if it were maybe cardboard, I could fill it up with sand.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I could fill the sand in here, and 4 times this would fill in here.
Yes, okay, I get that.
That's kind of important to keep in mind. But
all right, I got that.
That means, if we know that, still that this gives us a volume of 4, and this only of 1. And the cube only of 3. You know, the one that is related to that.
I got it.
Cool. So now all of that, just a little mathematical re-circuiting. Cool. Now that we have clarified that,
okay,
we can look one more step from here, which is interesting and cool to go. If we look at this 8-eye here at the heart of it, right?
mm-hmm.
You see it still has some open eyes where there is nothing on them, right? I could add 4 more 4 eyes to those.
Okay.
Right? And that gives you this shape.
Metatron.
Yeah, that is what the classical geometry, or the esoteric one, sacred one, calls the Merkaba. Mm-hmm. And this is kind of the heart of the cube in a way, because now we have all the 8 corners of the cube. If I hold it like this, it looks much more like that. Right? Yeah. So now we have already a structure that is manifesting all the corners of the cube. If we wanted to also have something that is here where there is no connection right now, mm-hmm. in the middle, then we would get to that famous structure that Nassim Haramein is always using, the 64 tetragrid.
Okay.
Because that is, again, filling a cube, but then you don't only have these corners, but also always one point in the center between them. Okay. So there's the beginning of a line, but that shows you how complicated the actual space-time structure is to even manifest the very simple aspects of the cube. Right, so that's why I like to call these things polyform also, because while looking at the world in cubes only gives you a uniform sense of the world, because everything is only cubes, when you do space-time like this, even the very beginning like that is already complementary. There is 2 kinds of shapes in this, and they are complementary. They arise mutually.
Okay. It's like the yin and yang.
Yeah,
the balance. Yes. Oh, I read your mind.
It's also, there's a very great number of connections between the 8 eyes and the yin and yang, which is also why my number symbol for my dozenal numbers for the number 8 is yin and yang.
Okay. 8.
Yeah. All right. So that complementarity.
Wait a second. I want to show you something.
Please.
When I was doing my yin and yang the other day, and I decided that I didn't like the first way it was going, so I went it the other way on it, and it makes an 8.
Yeah.
both directions make an 8.
Whoa, that's so crazy.
Right?
But isn't that nice? Yeah,
Infinity.
it's really cool.
Because you know what I'm realizing is that the yin and yang symbol is like one of those flat things. We're used to seeing it just as a flat symbol. But if it was a sphere, the yin and yang, then you would have like it would be not just like dissected in the middle of one half and one half.
I can tell you what it would be like, because you have that sphere in your experience. If you've ever held a tennis ball, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the seams of that,
the seams.
It's like this.
Yeah.
Right?
It's actually a mudra, I think.
And that is, yeah, if you look at it from one direction, it is like the yin and yang. But actually, if you look at what I'm doing here right now, this kind of motion, that's actually what the 4 eyes is doing. Right, so it's like these two go like that. Like, I can hold on to this and that.
Okay. See, now I'm starting to see the spin.
That was all good. If we take this so-called Merkaba and we look at it next to this, we see it's one of them going this way and another one going exactly the other way, like this.
Yes.
Right, so they intersect and they share a common heart. And this has something to do with chemistry, where you have the Octet Rule. So every molecule wants to get to a point where there's 8 electrons in the outermost shell, which means that it's closed off in its own, just like this. If I were to put this anywhere, it would come to rest like that. Right?
Okay.
It cannot sit on one of the eyes like this would. All of these things always sit on the triangle sides, if they are open. This cannot, because there's something pointing out there.
Unless it's spinning, like a top.
Yeah, or unless you put it into another eye, then maybe.
Okay.
But otherwise we would have to cut off one of the corners to have it rest. And that's something that has to do with the cubes that we live in, right? So if you think of the room that you're sitting in, and you draw these diagonals in the room, then you could connect the points where the diagonals cross in your room.
Yeah.
And if you were to connect them, they would make an 8-eye. Probably not a perfect one, because your room is probably cuboid but not cube.
Yeah.
But you notice that the 8-eye in your room is sitting on it's sitting on a corner, right? It's not resting.
Yeah.
So you're on edge in a way. Your whole the room you're in is on edge, and actually there is dead corners in it where you have dead air. That's what we literally call the non-moving air in the corners of a room is dead air. And why isn't it moving? Because parts of your room, parts of that cube, well, the room you're sitting in is still a sphere, whether you put it in a box or not. But parts of that box are within that sphere and parts are out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And all the parts of it that are within the sphere are moving with you, breathing with you, dancing, living. And all the parts that are outside of that sphere, but still inside of the cube, are cut off from life, and they are dead air. They are stagnant and they don't move.
Okay.
We take that.
Like feng
we
shui.
think that's that we kind of think that's we think that's usual and normal, and well, it's absolutely normal that our houses fall down when the earth shakes. You know, we live with that. but none of that is normal and none of that is natural. It's really kind of a fabricated condition. And on that same note, maybe if you feel like it, you can check out the video that I did on the pyramids, because I look at how, if you take half of an 8-eye, it's like that pyramid.
Yeah, and the other part is going in the ground.
Yeah, but notice that the pyramid means that our 8-eye is standing again like that, like it would be in the cube, whereas it could be resting on the ground, right? And if I take a higher frequency of the 8-eye, like this one, then you actually notice how if it's sitting like this, then you have that hierarchy, right? So you have the top and the bottom, and all that thing, all the stuff that we put into the myth of the pyramid, all of that baggage of patriarchy and civilization and all that. But actually, if the same thing was to rest on the ground like that, we would have a horizontal plane in it, like that hexagon.
Okay.
And we would have a polycentric structure, right? There is no top in this and no bottom. There is no above the others or something like that, because all of them are interconnected. And all the distances between them are one. Whether you go from this point to this point, or to that point, or to that point, it's always just one. Right? So I speak in that video about that and how that would maybe change our understanding of connection to the world if we were to flip the pyramids. Yeah, but that's all kind of going on tangents. Now let's do one last big step.
Okay.
And get back to where we started.
All right.
Right. So to get there, we can look at this again and say, all right, so let's take a higher frequency of that. Let's take this one. So the overall shape of that, the overall structure is a 4-eye, right? And now if I were to, I could cut in the same plane as this is, maybe here, right?
Yeah.
What I would get is the same structure, the same 4-eye, just smaller and trunk. Right? Bucky would always explain this with a cheese tetrahedron, because you can cut that and it stays, So that is something very unique, actually, that we can cut off here, and we still have the same shape, just smaller. That means we can move this plane out here and it gets bigger, but it stays a 4-eye. And we can go back and go smaller, and then bigger again, right? Just the other way around.
Right.
Right? That doesn't work with any other shape. If you cut a slice of a cube, you don't have a cube anymore. It only works with the 4-eyes.
Okay.
And there is only one point where it's different, where we don't have, like, if I move it this way, the volume increases and then it decreases, and over here it increases and it decreases. And there's only one point, which is exactly in the corner. If that one plane was to move through the same corner, then we wouldn't have a volume. It would be 0 volume, right? But what would we have? Ta-da! Okay, so if we were to identify this small tetra with this one here, same thing.
Okay. Yes.
Now, if we are to move that one plane of the 4 planes that make up this shape into that corner, that would be like this one. And this is the vector equilibrium. This is the mother of all spheres. It's the geometry of 0 for that reason, because it is the one condition where you don't have a volume at the center, at the heart. There's a point at the heart, right?
Yeah.
So this is a very special, very, very, very special thing, because, well, there's so many ways we can look at it, but we can look at it first, and maybe that helps a little. If I turn it this way around, then, sorry, I'm gonna focus on this and the camera. Now we're looking straight into this eye, right?
Okay.
And we can see there's a triangle here.
Yeah.
And then the next plane is this one. What shape is that?
I don't know what it's called. I don't know the names of the shapes, but I recognize it.
How many edges around it?
You got 6.
Yes, so it's a hexagon, right?
Okay.
6-sided, it's a hexagon. And that hexagon is the equator of the shape, if you like, right?
Okay.
And there's 4 of those intersecting in the same point. There's this one, there's this one, 3, and 4. So it's the same 4 planes of space-time that are already manifest in the very first 4 eyes. It's 4 planes. Right?
Ah, I see.
But now they all go through the same point. And
All right.
suddenly we have hexagons intersecting. And actually that's something we couldn't have in normal geometry. They say in the definition of the Platonic solids that it's impossible to have a solid which is made of hexagons. But it's not. It's just something that doesn't have a volume in itself in the center. We can talk about that volume, and there's 2 ways to do that, but that is already a very very good thing to keep in mind, that this is these 4 hexagons. And if you are familiar with your seat of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
You draw 1 circle, right?
Yeah.
And then with the same radius set on your compass, you go on the circumference of that circle and you draw again 1.
6.
You continue until you have 6 around that one.
Right.
Right? Now, I'm gonna take out one more little thing. Because...
Right. And I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So when I see what you're showing me with the vector equilibrium, you're showing it sitting on its flat side, on its eye.
Yeah.
But when I look at it in the fruit of life, it's the point is up.
Yeah.
Like,
we're getting there.
We're getting there? Okay, because that's throwing me off.
I know. And I will show you in a moment how you can draw the vector equilibrium.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
But first, let's do it with the real thing and take actual spheres. And I've got here some, these are tiny, but these are, one of them is magnetic and the others are, well, I guess passively magnetic. Now, if I do a circumference of spheres around 1, how many do you think do you get there?
For the vector?
When you just have 1 sphere and in the same plane you put more around it.
That's the 6. That's what the fruit of life that I get.
Yeah, that's in your fruit of life. Yeah. You are not working with intersecting spheres, but you're actually working in where they are meeting, kissing. Like
Is there symbolism in the difference between that?
It has to do with how. That's a very interesting kind of topic, because if you draw with your compass, you are using a radius, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a radius of a sphere would be that compass going around all directions, kind of like this, where the same radius goes out anywhere, and then actually that's why it's called the vector equilibrium, because the radii and the circumference vectors are identical.
Okay, yeah.
So whether you move from the center out or in, or you move around, every step is equal. Every way is the shortest, the shortest way with the least resistance, right? What nature is always using, and we are always going like, what? How does she do that? You know, because in the cubic mindset there is no such thing, because exactly that shortest direction is not existent. All right, but if you take spheres and you close pack them in a plane, you will get some sort of hexagonal thing. And now if you draw your circles with the compass, yeah, it's kind of a bit weird, because if you connect the seat of life, right? I think that's the name of it in sacred geometry, where you have one circle and then 6 circles on the circumference, and they all intersect in the center. Now if you connect all these vertices where you have a center of a sphere, then you get a hexagon, but it's a triangulated hexagon. It's like this. Yeah. Now you remember how we said that each vector really is half in one sphere and half in another, because it's the connection between 2 spheres.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's the same thing with this drawing, because you have one sphere, and if you have the same radius, then they intersect, they overlap by half. But if you wanted to have them separate, like you do in your drawings, then you actually kind of have to increase the frequency. You would have, if you were really to fill in the flower of life to a point where you have that round of 6 around one where they don't intersect, that's already a higher frequency.
Like that.
So maybe that helps a little to get a grip on that. Now, if this is one plane of space-time, so the seat of life, the 6 around 1 circles, is one plane of space-time of the vector equilibrium, right? Like this.
Yes.
Then there is 3 more. There's 3 more planes in the vector equilibrium. And to get from this to the actual vector equilibrium, we would still have to add 6 more spheres. So we can go 3 on one side, 1, 2, and 3, and they need to rest in those nests of the others, right? They don't sit on the top of the other spheres, but right in the nests of them.
So a vector equilibrium is basically a 3rd-dimensional fruit of life.
Yes and no. It is the fruit of life in space-time, but that is not 3rd-dimensional.
Oh, I gotta know more.
That's why I've been I keep emphasizing that there is no 3-dimensional space.
Right.
So
no, I'm 44. It's going to take me a little while to figure.
I know.
Wow.
But
okay.
I know that
I hear it this time, though. I hear you this time. I didn't hear you before, but now I do.
Yes. So that's just we spoke about how language matters in that sense, right?
Yes.
And if we frame the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the cube octahedron as three-dimensional solids,
Yes.
then there is no experiential proof to any of that.
Okay.
But
So
we
how
can
would you describe it?
Well, if we are to talk about dimensional anything, then I would call this four-dimensional, because space-time is already four-dimensional. Right? So the tetrods, the four eyes, has four planes. And the same four planes are manifest in the vector equilibrium, but they all intersect in the same point.
All right.
So space-time is four-dimensional, but that's not a cube and then another dimension. Of course, you could say that because you put this into the cube, and you could say now we have space-time because now it's, time and space together. But really, this is four-dimensional, and even the very first point with which we started is four-dimensional. It's already a body, and that's the difference between geometry and synergetics.
Okay, I see. I get the bigger
synergetics. Yes, synergetics starts with the whole. It starts with universe as one thing, because that's the only whole there is. That's the one that is everything. And from there we can go and say, okay, now we look at this part of universe, right? We look at this system. But if we start with universe, which is already a lot of bodies and a lot of space-time, then if we take a point within that, it's not without dimensions, but it's still four-dimensional. It's just microscopic, for instance.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm really kind of pedantic on that, because it's...
No, it's good. I see. Yeah.
To me, that's the crucial lesson that we get from synergetics, and one that I don't think is recognized at all. I mean, even in that book that I referenced, The Fuller Explanation by Amy Eppenson, there is a point in the book where she says, well, while all of this makes sense, and synergetics is a great tool to add to your palette, so to speak, I'm paraphrasing here, it does not mean that we need to abandon all the things we knew, all the things with the cube. You can still work with them. But I beg to differ, right? Because looking at the world, I see what the consequences are of that abstraction at the heart of everything that we do.
Yeah.
And it runs into all kinds of things, even to the part where I always like to make this point, is that one translation of this uniform static space idea into the real world is what we call monoculture, right? So if you have a monoculture on a field with a single crop, what you do is you define your borders of the field, usually rectangular, and you completely overlook all the topography of the field. It doesn't matter if it's hills or anything. You just plow anyways, straight lines, and then you produce one type of life inside of that border, and a uniform life where you put in all kinds of energy and technology that you have available to extinguish all other kinds of life who want to share that place. Right? So a monoculture is only there if you kill everything else that wants to be there.
Yeah. And you strip the nutrients eventually.
Yeah, you are it's a broken system. It's never gonna be better. It's not gonna become better. But it's always going to be wasteland in the end. Now, if you take the same idea and say you go into the next dimension, so to speak, from the plane into the volume, and you say, okay, here is my house, and it's a factory farm, and I have, I don't know, cattle in it, or pigs or something, and again, it's a monoculture, I do not let any other life share that place, right? So in that case, there is already very little, but it goes into the microscopic, so we do antibiotics and kill off everything that is smaller than the pigs, right? Again, to produce a uniform kind of life. Now, if you translate the same notion to a country, and you say, here's the borders, and within it I want one kind of human, preferably white and maybe male and whatever. You have that ideal of humans, and you again extinguish and exterminate everything that differs.
Yeah.
And we suddenly call the same idea maybe fascism or something like that.
Yes.
Right? But it is the same. It's just different levels of implications, or of the violence is the same. The notion and the results are the same.
The same formula.
It only seems different because in our understanding we make a difference between our life, human life, whatever that encompasses at the time. I mean, during the Holocaust it was clear what was supposed to be life and what wasn't. In slavery, the same kinds of doctrines were used to say one life is superior over the others, and that gives you the right to all of that, you know. It's again and again and again, it's the same kind of systematic
Hi, puppy. The neighbor's dog is here.
yeah,
Hi.
nice. Right, so it's in a way, this whole idea of cubic nonsense leads all the way down to that. And it's fascinating. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Rastas, the Rastafarians.
Yeah.
So we talk about Babylon system, right? And we take that from the Bible. But Babylon system, you could say that is the idea of monoculture, and that kind of agriculture that comes with that, and plowing the earth to force it to bring forth, you know, single crops and all that. But what Rasta's contrast to that is roots culture. Babylon system and roots culture. Now, roots culture in the sense of gardening would maybe be something like permaculture, where you increase the diversity and the resilience, and you use all dimensions of space-time to make that thing a thriving organism. But to keep it simple, we could say Babylon system is the uniform static space, the cube without the triangles, whereas roots culture literally means the square root. Right?
Grounded.
So there is a lot of these kinds of philosophical and historical parallels and things that come into that, even to the point where in my mother tongue, in German, the word for left, right, left angle is links, right is rechts and left is links. Now if I talk about missing links and linking up, right, that's all kind of that cosmos of words,
right,
and it points to the potential of that shift in perspective and
unifying,
reintegrating, you know, because we don't need to go back to nature. We've never left her, except for the way that we think, because that way of thinking is the antithesis to life.
Yeah.
Right? It's dead, and it's the only dead thing in the universe, the only one that will not transform in death, because usually death of one means birth of another.
Yeah.
There's a transformation, but in cubic thinking there's only one reform after the other, and every new form is the old form. Right? It's all uniform. Okay.
Haha.
That's just, some of the further orbits.
Symbology of how it's
Yes.
relatable to life.
Exactly. And how these things matter even if we don't think of them usually. But yes, that is the difference between this kind of framework that we've used and the one that nature is using. And it's remarkable about the vector equilibrium that this balance of it includes the fact that whatever way you go, it's the same. Right?
Yes.
And the same way I can increase the frequency of any of these other things and systems, I could do the same with the vector equilibrium. I could add another shell around it. Right?
So the
Another
vector
shell of
equilibrium could
spheres.
get to a second frequency and a third frequency? Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
And there is formulas for how many spheres you get and all that is there, and it's really interesting and noticeable. But what comes out of that is also, again, a way to recognize how the shape that we think of, right, like this one, is very, very specific and defined, well defined. It has clear lines and corners and all that. Now, if I were to start with one frequency like this, it's much more round, right? It doesn't look as defined. Now, if I increase the frequency of that, I increase the resolution at the same time, right? So it becomes more and more sharp in the edges, and the corners
then the valleys or the
more clearly
intervals
defined.
deeper.
Well, not really, but they increase in number.
Okay.
And if do I have one? I don't really have higher frequency models of these at
It's
hand.
okay. I can look it up. I can
Yes.
Google.
If you do, you will see that, and you will see how adding layers to the thing makes it more and more clearly defined. But what stays the same, what remains the same and ever true about the vector equilibrium is, even if you have a very high frequency, then the distance from the center to one of the outermost corners, however many intervals there are, is identical to the distance between two of these outermost corners.
They're always equal.
They are always equal. And there's always that hexagonal thing to it. But of course, this is still moving and dancing.
But so you said there's a bottom though, right? You said if it sits.
Yes, it can sit on one triangle. It could, of course, also sit on one of these squares if it liked to.
But would it sit on its end, like a top, like the fruit of life does?
That only does when it spins. When
it spins. All right, and that's what I'm interested in, is the spinning of it.
Right, and if you do that, you have that very fundamental aspect of life that is that it always spins time. It doesn't spend time, but it spins it. And even anything that is with us on this globe, on this world that we are on, is spinning with us on the earth, right? So even a tree that seems to be rather rooted and, immobile, it moves with the wind maybe, and it grows all the time, but it doesn't appear to be moving. But really it is, because the earth with it is spinning, so that's why it grows in this kind of way.
Yeah.
Because there's always the sun to follow, you know, and it's always spinning. And if you spin these things, then very quickly what seems to be a triangle turns into a circle. Right? And with the vector equilibrium, that is also true. It just if you spin it quickly, it just blurs into a sphere. And what else? Oh yeah, let me show you.
Well, then there's a
this one.
vortice that's made in the middle of it spinning.
Yeah. So I sent you the video where I had this model.
Yeah.
Right. So this is almost like the equilibrium place of this, right, where all the eyes are squares here, but it's a bit more like that.
Okay.
Because in this case, I've connected the corners with that going
And a little bit of motion.
Going through that center there, right? All of these sticks, they pass by one another in the center,
I
and
see.
they do so by forming in the very center a 4 eyes. Right? I don't know if that is actually.
Yeah.
You can actually see that.
I see it.
Yeah.
And so that's like
Right.
the nucleus.
Yes, it's the center of gravity of the whole, and with that nucleus, this can hold that shape, right? Because this nucleus is not bound in place, but one thing that the whole is doing, it can still transform like this, right? And in this shape here, it doesn't look like a 4-eye in the center. But if I didn't put those sticks in there, the same thing would be like this. So this is really only the outer shell of vectors, right?
Okay.
And since there is no nucleus in it, it's not omnitriangulated anymore. It's one of Bucky's words, because there is squares, right? And that means that if I let go of it,
Now
it
it's
just
not
collapses.
stable.
Exactly, it's a transform again. Because that's one of the beauties of the square, is that it gives you that option of movement, right? Like this.
Oh, the square is what gives it the movement. Okay.
Yeah, and if you think about it, we are not trees. A tree has the roots growing down and the branches growing up, and they tend to have that tetra thing about them, where it's 3 and 3. Turns into more than 3, but very often it starts with that. And the tree is triangulated with the ground because it's growing into it, right? If you have 2 roots growing like this, the ground is triangulating them. Now we, on the other hand, are not. We are living in a way where our triangulation is only going.
Oh,
Ooh,
you've been playing in the pond.
good dog.
I have his biscuits over there. He probably wants some. It scared me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. If you and I, we are only able to live in the world because our triangles are open, right? What do I mean with that? I mean that, for instance, you have a pair of eyes, right? You have 2 eyes and you look at one world.
Uh-huh.
Now you can look at the whole at once, and it's kind of blurry, and you have that kind of overview effect. But if you focus in on anything, you're triangulating. Your 2 eyes and that one point are a triangle. That's why you can perceive depth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now 2 ears and one world give you the same effect. You can locate sound because you're triangulated. Right?
Yes.
Now I can talk to you because my mouth is like a triangle that is open. It's also why I can chew. Now I can also hold on to anything because this is an open triangle, and it's completed by whatever I hold. It's the same with my arms embracing something.
Wow.
It's the same with my legs walking on the ground.
Wow. Huh.
Because our triangles are always open to the rest of the world, is that we can interact with it in so many ways.
Huh. Okay, I like that.
And we are kind of a bit like that square in a way, because we have 4 legs, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that gives us a great freedom of movement, right?
Of creation, of
Yeah.
consumption, even.
Because in essence, and I'm speaking as a capoeirista right now, if I'm moving around, whenever I have 3 points of contact with the world, I'm very stable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing can throw me off balance easily in that moment. But I still have a 4th limb, so I can change that 3rd point, right? I can switch it. I can put it somewhere else and let go of the other one and still have 3, right? So there is that possibility of interaction that is greater than if we only had 3 legs. But
We have better probabilities this way.
Yeah, and think of the rest of creation, and you see, okay, insects, for instance, 6 legs. Weird, but well, somehow resonant with the whole tetra has 6 connections, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I find intriguing particularly is the spiders. How many legs?
8.
How many eyes?
Oh, I have no idea. How many do they have?
8.
8 eyes?
8 eyes. They have 8 eyes and 8 legs. And what do? They spin and weave webs.
Yeah.
It's like the embodiment, literally, of the 8 eyes in that weird kind of resonance where you, of course, they are not, they aren't an octahedron, but there is a type of resonance between these two. And yeah, I really like to look for these kinds of resonances.
Similarities between
Yes.
systems. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, but let's go back to this, and that's the rest of what we do for now, is that if I hold it like this, I hold bottom and top, if so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you see, but one is pointing to you and the other one is pointing to me.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now if I move them without spinning them like this, I move them towards one another, the whole thing spins. You see the equator spins,
Yes.
right? And it goes together to form the 8 eyes. And it can also go back out, and it's a bit hard because these straws have a tendency to go one way, but it could also just as easily.
I can
if it
imagine
wasn't biased, if it weren't biased, it could go the other way.
it. Okay.
So this can move both ways, this wave. But you see how it goes from a very expanded phase to one that is more contracted, right? And here, this would already be stable in a way. I mean, these might tend to explode again because there's so much tension in them, but you can settle this down and it stays like that. Because again, it's omni-triangulated now. But that's not the end of it, because we can go into that phase and then do twist a little. This. Oops.
Only
And
half.
what we get is kind of the trunk that we were getting before when we cut off a slice of this thing.
Yeah.
So this kind of thing is the trunk that is left over. And putting it top on there would make it a tetragon. But from here it can fold even further down to get to a 2-frequency left angle. And that one can fold and give you the 4 eyes.
Wow.
And this is the place where space-time turns inside out, because you can fold it the other way around, and what was inside.
I saw that in your
outside.
other video, yeah.
A very, very, very beautiful thing. This is what I call the dance of the Tao. And Bucky called this the jitterbug, which was a popular dance at his time.
Yeah.
But to me, Dance of the Tao makes a lot of sense, because when I read Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching and got into Taoism, I realized this is pure synergetics. It's more poetic maybe than some of Bucky's, but it is pure synergetics. And what they talk about when they talk about the Tao as we look at yin and yang, and we see yin and yang, we see two things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in Taoism, where this originates, it's called Tai Chi Tu, and yin and yang are not separate. They are together making the Tao. They are kind of like two sides of the Tao, like the inside and outside, like the light and the dark.
Yeah.
But they always arise mutually. They come into being at the same time. And you cannot have one without the other.
The positive and negative.
Yes.
Like the charge or an atom.
But even in that case, you will not have one without the other. Right?
Oh, yes.
Like even a magnet, if you think of a magnet, like that famous rod, there's one pole and there's a second pole,
right.
But both are part of the same magnet. And if you cut it in half, you have two magnets and they still have two poles each.
Right.
So the polarity is just a condition of the unity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely contrary to the way we are brought up to think of the world.
Yes.
Because we always think in exclusive and not inclusive. We see the foreground and overlook the background. We see the yin and don't see the yang, literally. We only ever look at one side of something and not the other, because we've never been taught that both are the same.
Yes. That's why I'm into like that. I'm starting to go down the yin yang, the Tai Chi. I want to start studying that. And that's why I realized well, which way does it spin? And then I found out well, it spins, there is only one way. It's just the polarity. It just depends on what side of the page you're looking at it from. And so then that's why I was like, okay, I need to figure out how does this all go in with atoms and torque and spin and the torus and all of the systems together, so that I could have a grasp. What am I doing with the fruit of life? Like how I'm using it. Yeah. There's a lot of symbolism in it. And I want to find the mechanics of that thought process that I've been doing for a few years.
Yeah.
You're giving me answers.
I really love that you do that, because that's the beauty for me about all of this, is that it's something that we have in common, right? It doesn't belong to one and not the other. It belongs to us all. And it's something that we share with the whole of cosmos, of universe. And we cannot culturally appropriate it from anybody, because it is something that we all are before we have culture, before we have any of these things.
Before we have an understanding of it. Even. Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know, are you familiar with Ursula Le Guin? She's an author, a very famous one, and my copy of the Tao Te Ching, which is the book that Lao Tzu, the first Taoist, wrote, my first copy of that Lao Tzu book was Ursula Le Guin's version of it, and it's really, I cannot recommend enough that you check out that, because I think it will fill in some of the things that I've left out.
Okay.
And it's full of wisdom that you can take into.
She's writing about the I Ching?
No, the Tao Te Ching.
The Tao Te Ching. Okay.
I think her book, I could check, it's lying around somewhere over there. Her book is called Lao Tzu, The Power of the Way and the... I'm sorry. I can look
It's okay. If you see it later, then if you come across it.
I will. I might even have the audiobook somewhere. But anyways, that's really just, if you are feeling any resonance with that kind of direction, then I can...
That's the direction I'm going, is the Tai Chi, the I Ching, the Taoism basically is the direction that I'm going right now to research. So.
And if you go there, you will notice that they do not talk about synergetics at all. You know, they don't, even in the Tao Te Ching, there is a lot of references that you could relate to it, like 30 spokes meet in a hub. And then you go, 30? Wait, we didn't talk about this one, right? The Icosa. It's that in-between phase, right? Between the vector equilibrium and the 8 eyes, there's a halfway, like this, where what used to be squares, like here, turns into these kind of rhombi, and you see how the distance, the diagonal is of the same length, again, the same vector length. So there's 6 of these squares. We could add 6 more vectors, which is 1 more quantum, and then we would have not 2 dozen as this is, but 2 dozen and a half, which is 30, which is the number of vectors that you have in the so-called icosahedron, the 20 eyes. But I began talking about this as the dozen and 8 eyes, because that is 20, dozen and 8. And it's beautiful because the vector equilibrium is the dozen around 1, right? And if you collapse it down, it's the 8 eyes. And halfway between that is the dozen and 8 eyes. Right?
You start to see all the patterns jump out at you, huh?
Yeah, totally. And this one, if you have a tensegrity of it, you can actually transform it. You can push in some of the corners. So this would give you the famous Geodesic Dome, because that's usually based on this shape, because this has almost 20 times the volume of our tetra, but it's only let's think, it's only 5 times the parts, but almost 20 times the volume compared to the tetra, right? So that is a lot of volume with a little surface.
Yeah.
Which is ideal if you have to create a house or something, because then you have the minimum transmission of heat between both inside and outside. That's why they tend to take this thing for the domes.
Love the
right?
dome, the Bucky dome.
We can push in another corner and we get a wheel.
Huh.
I actually have a bone. It might be from a fish or a bird that is exactly like this. It's from a spine. It's
And it looks like that?
exactly that kind of shape.
Wow.
Even down to that hole going through here.
Wow.
But Lao Tzu speaks of 30 spokes meeting in a hub. You know, there is that kind of resonance sometimes, but at another place he says that you cannot model these things, and then I disagree on that. Yeah.
Awesome.
So that was a short but kind of exhausting look into and out to these things.
Look into and out of. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's another notion. You spoke of sunrise and sunset being problematic. Bucky actually said that too, and he said he looked for alternatives and started speaking of sun eclipse and what is the other? some site and some
Some
clicks.
site, yeah. That's where I heard,
So-
like, that's where I got it was from Bucky that I realized.
Turning that
yeah,
around.
it doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Bucky.
Yeah, there's something. And another thing he says always is that there is no up and down in the universe, right?
In and
Up
out.
and down only makes sense because for us it's clear that we speak of the Earth as our reference frame. But
As a
exactly,
square.
it's in, out, and around.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the three possible.
In, out, and
Yeah,
around.
that's the thing. You can go into the Earth, into the center, you can out, and you can go around. And then you don't need to speak of up and down.
Yeah.
Okay, and one final last glimpse,
All right.
because that's just, I think, good to keep in mind. This thing we said can move, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a way to make it stop. And if we were to add spheres to these open square sites, we would kind of add like this.
Uh-huh.
Now there's another sphere out here. And what that gives us is my personal favorite of all these shapes is this one. So you can see that the light color in there is the vector equilibrium, right?
Okay.
But the whole thing is an 8i. But it's the second frequency of the 8i.
But that's not a vector equilibrium anymore. That's something else now.
Now it's a 2 frequency 8i's.
Frequency.
But at the heart of that is the vector equilibrium, right? And that is interesting because, of course, you can add to that, and you could create equivalent to this, where you have the 8i in the center and the 4i's around. You could add 4i's to this and get a big 4i,
Mm-hmm.
and at the center of the 4i's then is the vector equilibrium.
And it
So
just
that
becomes Legos. You can just keep putting the same structure. That's the fractal, I guess. That's
Yeah, and exactly that. And it also shows you how it's possible that there are so many shapes in the universe, because if you have that kind of framework
yeah.
to play with, you have so many opportunities and options. And to me, we are living in a kind of a mesocosm, right? So there's the microcosm full of spheres, which we can't say, and there's the macrocosm full of spheres, which we can't see, or most of them. We see the sun and the moon sometimes, and sometimes even think of them as spheres, even though they somehow people think of them as disks. I don't know, strange, but why not? But within our kind of scale of the whole, it's easy to not see the spheres that are everywhere, because they are either too small or too big. And at our level of resolution, they tend to make very complex shapes, you know, and so it's easy to not notice. But then again, you can go ahead and see, wait, my head, we speak of the dome of the skull, right? My butt is also kind of
But I even
round and
see it in
spherical.
fingers, like in my knuckles,
Yes.
like I see the spheres. Like these are all spheres, and then this is a spear, and this is a
Yes.
sphere. Like I see, like I'm just
Yes,
made up of a bunch of little bubbles.
yes, absolutely. And
That's how I imagine it.
now we actually can use that, you know, we can make sense of it, and we can understand the principles and patterns of them. And that's what synergetics really is about. It's the study, maybe the play, the game
Application.
Of-
Yeah.
of learning the generalized principles of nature.
Mm.
And this is something that Bucky says. He calls these things generalized principles because they are always true. They never contradict one another, but they are only inter-accommodative.
Okay.
And each one adds to the others, right? So they will never not fit together, but they will always add to one another. And that is fantastic, because it means whenever you see anything in the world that people have been doing with triangles, you can add it to what you already have.
Yes.
It will fit.
Yeah, I'm finding that I can.
It's also kind of a. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of also a decolonizational or decolonizing thing. If we stop speaking of the laws of nature and start speaking of generalized principles of nature, because laws of nature, as Alan Watts was very keen to point out, is based in the tradition of thinking of the universe as something that is a kingdom of God, right? So there's a ruler making the laws, but a law is something that you put into place because someone has behaved in a way that you want them not to, right? So there was, before you have any law, you have something doing the opposite of that, and then you put in a law to prevent it.
Yeah.
But that's not what nature is doing with gravity and these things. They are not laws, but principles.
Principles or application of something. Yeah, I see that.
Cool. Now, with that, I'm just thinking if I think I'm just gonna send you maybe a picture of it or something of how you can draw the vector equilibrium with compass and straight edge.
Yeah.
Essentially, if you do the seed of life, right? So the 6 around 1, you could already draw it in there, but that is only 7 spheres, and the vector
I tried
equilibrium
before we talked today. I tried.
Yes.
But I don't think I didn't get all the lines in there. I don't think I quite got it.
that's quite on the right track. Like the central star that you have, the blue one, or whatever color it is, if you connect that around with the hexagon and find a few more lines in there, then you have the vector equilibrium. The big one is would be a higher frequency of it, but let me.
I'll keep playing with it.
Okay, let me show you this one. Okay. I don't know if you can tell from this drawing. So what I drew, it's really kind of hard.
So the circle on the spheres on the outside, they don't overlap the inner one, right?
Exactly. They are like the first layer of your pattern.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can see how the centers of those are connected in a way by the start that you drew. See that?
Mm-hmm. I see what it is. It's because I tried to attach them when it was vertical instead of flat like yours is.
Well, but that doesn't matter. I can have it this way or that way.
But the triangles, like the Metatron's cube, those two triangles, you don't call them triangles.
Yeah.
Those 4 eyes, those 2 4 eyes are the wrong direction on mine.
Having the wrong direction is not as easy as it sounds.
Oh yeah?
Let me try quickly to draw this, just to... I don't usually use this shape of paper anymore. This better?
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing I would
we've talked about the
suggest,
paper before.
Yes, you know,
Uh-huh.
for the stuff you're doing, I think it would be absolutely wonderful to try this. To try to have a paper that is already hexagonal.
Yeah.
That's one of the basic things in synergetics is called pattern integrity.
Okay.
And that means if you decide on one pattern, you keep with it. Right, so in terms of these structures, it often means that if you decide on one of two possible directions for your vortex, right? If you have a corner and you pass the sticks by one another, and you pass them by this way, then you want to pass them exactly the same way in all the other corners, and not have one corner go this way and the other way that. Because if you mix them, you break the pattern at some point. If you don't mix them, then you get, like with this one, it's probably impossible to see on this one, but if you could see that looking at this triangle here, this stick goes over that one, this one goes over that one, and this one goes over that one.
Yeah.
And that is true all around the thing, because I keep the pattern integrity. I could break it, and the whole thing would still look like a 4-eyes, but then it would have
The string.
redundancy in it. Yes, it would lack the integrity. Cool. And now for the last thing, I'm just gonna... would make sense to take I'm gonna get my compass, I'm sorry. What we need is not only the 6 around the 1, but when we have them, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, yeah, I'm really
Big.
really not precise at all.
Oh.
Oh, wow. That is a bit of a discrepancy in the last corner. Okay, 6, right?
Okay, yes.
So far, so good.
Yep.
Now we add 6 more, right? Because now we have 6 plus 1 and we need 12 plus 1. And those 6 are there at the intersections of the ones that we drew last.
Okay.
Okay, so you will see that the outer ring of spheres that you drew, they have intersections where they meet, and it's 6 of those. So adding those, using those points as centers of the last 6 gives us all of the spheres that are in vector equilibrium.
Oh.
You could already draw the thing with only the first 6 around 1 that gives you all the information for the vector equilibrium, but it kind of misses some of the spheres. Alright. So we...
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so now in there you just need some lines which connect the vertices. Maybe this. Okay, so all we need is the connections between the centers of the spheres. We can go, I think it's actually connecting all of them, and then you get it. So we could start with the very first inner sphere and have that connected with the centers of the 6 that go around that one, right?
I basically drew like a 2-frequency vector equilibrium.
In in a way, yeah. And you still have a few more connections missing. But in a way, with that outer thing, that outer ring,
Yeah.
Yeah. If we were to speak of really these non-overlapping spheres and look at them, then you would have a 2 frequency there. Right.
Let's see.
But that one, a 2 frequency vector equilibrium, the second layer of it has 42 spheres in that layer, plus the 12 in the one below, plus the one in the center, which actually counts twice because it has inside and outside. So that is 42 plus 12, which is 56. 54 plus 2, 56. That's a lot of spheres.
Yeah, that's a lot of spheres.
Okay, so now here I got the hexagon
Mm-hmm.
with the triangles. Now there is these the centers of the spheres that we drew where the outer ring meets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that making sense? I'm sorry, it's getting later and later.
Yeah. It's getting close to my dinner time too.
Yeah, we're getting there. But now if I connect those, they are actually kind of the continuation of the circumference of the hexagon.
Mm-hmm.
And this shows why I was so not precise. Ouch!
Okay, accept it.
Yeah.
Just like nature.
Yeah.
Those
Exactly.
acorns, they have to show up different.
Like this.
Okay, yeah. All right.
And then the other one. Kind of like that. And that's the thing you've drawn. Right? The center star that you got.
Yeah.
Alright. So now there's connections between those, between the points of the star.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that is, if you like, the circumference of our actual big hexagon. 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it looks like that.
Okay. Yeah, I got that.
Cool. Now there is not so much missing. There is still there is still the connections between the tip of that star that we had and the center. Let me draw those. They go through all the way. Ah, my cat returns.
Must be time for something else.
Yeah, it is. We're getting there. this is almost the last step. Okay. So now we kind of triangulated the big hexagon.
Uh-huh.
And now there's only one type of connection missing, because the center 6 around 1 are actually three. Where am I showing this? Where is the camera now? There. The 6 around 1 is the equator, so
Yes,
to speak.
the equator. I like
so
that.
there is 3 above and 3 below that.
Mm-hmm.
And they are sitting on opposite.
Yes. This
on
is like
opposite
what?
nests.
Yeah. I call it
Right.
Metatron, but yes.
Yeah. So now if we connect those, then we have the whole thing, and that only means in the first circle that we drew, we also gonna connect like this. Essentially, if you draw the hexagram, which is the 6-pointed star, also called the Star of David, if you draw that also in the center sphere, it's a smaller one then, but that is the connection between the 3 spheres on the bottom and the 3 spheres at the top here.
So we have, okay, so it's almost like 2 frequencies of the Star of David.
Yeah, in a way. And this is the mother of all spheres in terms of the spheres that are there, because there's now 1,001. And also the vector equilibrium when we talk about the connections between the spheres. So
All right.
we've drawn those vectors here, right?
Yeah.
And I'm gonna take a picture of that and send it to you so that you have a better
Good
copy
quality of it.
Yeah. And I hope this was of help to you. And
Oh my gosh, yeah.
yeah, but
I love it. I have gotten a lot. I took some notes. I'll send you the notes that I took. But obviously some of it's going to have to sink in for me to really
Sure.
pull it together.
Absolutely, yes.
And then I'm going to retry this. But what I'll do is I'll see if I can edit the video together, like cut out some of the dead time and make it something that we could put on YouTube.
Wonderful.
In case anybody wants to listen to us talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, why not? It's brilliant, and it's
Perspective.
it's there for us to share, because I really want to live in a world where everyone is familiar with these things, where we are kindred again with the spheres within and without us. So we do not need to be violent to the world anymore to enforce some sort of static idea. But instead we can actually embrace the grace of it all, and the movement and the change and the dancing of everything.
Yes, change. That's my flavor. Like that's my passion, is to show people that change is okay. It's actually natural and appropriate.
Yes.
So yeah, this has been great.
The constant thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
you can count on it. All right, thank you, Struppi. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.
You too, and hear from you soon, I hope.
Yes, yeah.